This presentation today is about why a lot of attorneys are angry and dislike their jobs in their lives. And several years ago, there was a solo practitioner from Ohio that applied to work with BCG Attorney Search, and he applied to work with us several times. And each time we told him we couldn't work with him. And honestly, at BCG, we try to work with almost everyone if we can, if we have positions. But in his particular case, he didn't have any experience and he'd been unemployed for a while. There wasn't really much that I could do to help him at the time, unfortunately. And unbeknownst to me at the time, he was convinced that I didn't really do any recruiting and that the only purpose that I had was to write about the legal market, advertise jobs, and then tell people I couldn't help them, which unfortunately is not exactly, what the point of what I do is. And he assumed that there was maybe that I was sick or something, and there was some pleasure that I was getting and not helping him. And then he reached a conclusion somehow that I guess maybe that I was responsible for keeping him unemployed. He became very upset and started basically a hate website that talked about, how I was responsible for his lack of success and other people's lack of success in the legal profession because I didn't have jobs for all of them. And then it became a site that dealt with or implied that there was a conspiracy to keep him and other people down. And this went on for a long time. There were attacks against me, also my wife at the time, and he believed that the company didn't even exist, and maybe I didn't even exist, and which was unfortunate. And I'll have more to say about this in a moment. But this particular incident was pretty incredible and honestly, in many ways, very tragic. But before I tell you more about him and what happened, I'd like to ask you a couple things. What do you think is going on here? Why would somebody be so upset with me? I'm, and again, don't think I'm the most important person in the world, but why would, by any stretch of the imagination, why would someone think that a legal placement person is the cause of their troubles because he can't help them get a job? And people have been getting jobs without me for the longest period of time. And while I help a lot of people, I'm certainly not the only person that gets people jobs. If anything, I'm probably the smallest speck, and more people get jobs without me than 99% of the people probably do it without me. So it's not, or more. So why would someone take me so seriously that they believe that I was keeping them out of the job market? And I guess the question I'd like to ask you, because I've certainly done this sort of thing before. Have you ever blamed others for your own lack of success or for the lack of positive things occurring in your career? Have you ever worried that other people might have been responsible for things not happening the way you want in your career? And that's a fair question. Have you ever felt that someone else and not you was responsible? And really, attorneys are very competitive by nature. They have to be competitive. They admire and respect other attorneys who are also competitive. And of course, if you are hiring an attorney, wouldn't you want an attorney who's not competitive to defend you or represent you? And I certainly wouldn't want this type of attorney in my corner. The more competitive an attorney is, the more capable the attorney is, irrespective of kind of their paper qualifications. Society needs attorneys that are competitive. If you're competitive with other attorneys, you're likely to do well. And large law firm attorneys often bill the most hours, not because they have to, but because they need to be the most competitive. If a law firm can find a competitive attorney, then the firm is probably also serving its clients very well. And so you have to ask, how important is the competitive nature of attorneys to law firms? And honestly, the people that go to the best schools and get the best grades and get access to the most jobs and the highest paying jobs, and the attorneys that tend to be the most competitive. The attorneys who bill the most hours generally have the most job security. And the attorneys with the most business generally get the most jobs. And over the past year, it was interesting. I've represented a couple of Olympic athletes who are now attorneys, and they had decent, but not stellar qualifications. And you might have thought the opposite based on what was happening with them. There was literally a major feeding frenzy over both of them. And even though their practice areas were not very much in demand. And one attorney received at least 10 offers and the other at least 5. And this occurred when I was representing much more qualified candidates from better firms, better law schools, and better grades to the same firm. It's the same firms, and they weren't getting interviews or even that level of success. I asked myself what was going on, and one of the things that I heard when I was talking to one of the firms was they said, we want our attorneys to be competitive. And as I observed all of this, the only thing I concluded was that the competitive spirit, presumed to be inherent in a former Olympic athlete, was really driving a lot of interest in these candidates. And probably the association with the Olympics was helpful too. But the whole idea of really having been an Olympic athlete and so forth is something that I think the law firms liked a lot. And a major undercurrent of the legal profession involves, I think, the status of what an attorney is. And status is something that all animals, including humans, are very concerned with. And when a dog meets, for example, they sniff each other to understand each other's relative status. And the animal that is lower status knows that if it attempts to challenge the higher status, it will upset the higher status animal, could get hurt. And attorneys are very good at understanding their status in the legal community. Status makes them feel good about themselves and be more successful. And without the ability to compare themselves to others, the status of most attorneys becomes meaningless. So when attorneys meet each other, it's interesting. They often start sniffing each other out. They ask each other where they work, where they went to law school. And when attorneys are discussing their relative status with one another, when one attorney shows any form of superiority to the other attorney generally feels threatened. And the threatened attorney is going to react by either accepting their lower status and choosing not to fight, or fighting and choosing not to accept their lower status. And this similar phenomenon I've also noticed happens when firms go up against each other. And small firms battling large firms, for example, believe that the fight is just as much about status as about the issue at hand. And they'll say, oh, we beat this bigger firm, or we got this big motion, and so forth. And status happens within law firms as well. And if you're a contract attorney, law firms people will ask you that. If you're a partner or associate, or are you an equity partner or an income partner? And the law firms that are the highest status also tend to attract the best candidates. So just a lot of status in the legal profession, and it's everywhere. And you should watch how status is playing out in the games between attorneys, between law firms, and the legal profession generally. And status is something that is very important. And when an attorney is confronted by their own lack of status in the legal profession, an attorney has the option to do the following. First, they can make efforts to improve their status. They can help elevate the status of others so that attorney can get status. They can get others to elevate the attorney's status to help elevate their status, which I guess would be relying on me. They can hurt the status of others so they feel better about themselves and their lack of status, or they can have others help the attorney pull down and disparage the status of those who threaten the attorney's status, so that attorney feels better about their status or lack of status. So if you're an attorney and you're competitive, you're going to be faced with these choices. And I think almost every attorney is quite competitive. And most attorneys, I believe, are eager to improve their status within their law firms and within the legal profession and within society. And most of the things I talk about the importance of making choices 1 through 3 and avoiding choices 4 through 5. So 1 through 3 are you can make efforts to improve your status, you can elevate the status of others, which means the people you're working for, then you can get others to help elevate your status by doing a good job, and avoid hurting others in the process, which is one of the things that a lot of people do. I believe that the most important thing you can do for your career is to make efforts to improve your status, but go about it in the correct way. So how do you improve your status? I believe that working hard, getting an LLM from a prestigious law school, if you didn't attend one originally, getting business, becoming a better attorney, those are some of the ways you can improve your status. You can also help elevate the status of others so they can help elevate your status. This means you want to work hard for people so they want to return you the favor. You can also get others to elevate your status for you, often even if you don't deserve it. You can do this through family connections, getting a favor from a powerful person, and so forth. And very few attorneys make choices 1 through 3 when their status is threatened. Most of them don't make that decision. Those are the best things. If you work hard, they want to return your favor. If you get others to elevate your status, that's also helpful. And you can also do it through connections and so forth. That can help you as well. But the majority of attorneys that I come into contact with make choices 4 and 5 at some point in their careers. And they become the kind of people that like to blame and attack others. And they don't always make that choice initially, but generally at some point in their careers when their status is threatened, they make that choice. And this is one of the major reasons why attorneys are so angry and become negative people who disparage and tear down others. There are 2 reasons for this. First, the legal profession by its very nature makes it very difficult for an attorney to attain and maintain high status. That's the first thing. And achieving initial status with law firms or big firms is extremely competitive. If you don't achieve the status, holding on to this is very difficult as well, even if you do achieve it initially, because when you go to a large firm, most attorneys don't even last more than 5 years there. And second, this is just part of the way legal training works, is Attorneys are trained to blame others for most things, and we respect an attorney's ability to make our clients look better by dressing down the other side and making them look bad. And attorneys are expected to take their client's side and make the other side look less deserving, regardless of the matter at issue. And this is just how attorneys tend to view things. If something has gone wrong in a transaction, litigation matter, and so forth, then someone other than our client is often at fault. This person or company's incompetence, crookedness, bias, and so forth diminishes the respect that he or she deserves as a person or company. And the person, of course, may deserve to be called names, talked about poorly, and even physically attacked or killed. That's what some people think. And our clients do not need to accept any responsibility, because if they admit that, this would diminish the respect that they have as people, and therefore entitle them to the negative treatment. Every transaction and litigation matter that an attorney takes on a side generally involves some variation of these 4 steps. First, someone other than our client is in fault. You can see this, play out in pretty much every trial and notable transaction. And O.J. Simpson, which a lot of people in my generation remember, the police were portrayed as incompetent and racist, for example. And then because his defense team maintained he was wrongly, the bad people were the police and perhaps even the victims. One was portrayed as promiscuous, another narrative who didn't deserve the respect of the public, the jurors, or the accused. And the need to blame others, find fault, and portray others at fault also applies many times to how attorneys evaluate their own lives. And it's rare that I speak with an attorney who is willing to accept full responsibility for whatever issues they're experiencing in their career. And the worst thing that attorneys can do is blame others for the lack of success they're hoping to achieve. Blaming others and attempting to push down the status of others because of our own lack of status and success is honestly, one of the most dangerous things. And not only does blaming others lead to our continued lack of success, it also leads to the worst acts that humans can do to one another. The Holocaust, ethnic cleansing, most lawsuits, crimes, and other negative things are often caused by a propensity to blame others. And our interest in blaming others and taking them down for our own lack of status is profound. And I unfortunately hear from attorneys on a daily basis. And if an attorney gets a poor evaluation, it becomes hostile to the evaluator of the law firm and makes nasty comments about things that can hurt. And an attorney often makes a huge mistake on a project and blames the firm for giving them too much work. If an attorney doesn't bill enough hours and loses a bonus, they blame the firm for not having enough work or allowing the attorney to bring in clients or having a flawed assignment system. And attorneys that don't get made partner blame the firm often for being sexist or racist or homophobic or things like hating white males. So as an attorney moves firms, gets fired or quits, and then blames the firm, that's typically what happens. He'll just move around continually blaming others. And if an attorney is having a difficult time getting a position and looks for reasons outside of them to justify what is happening, they'll just blame others. And I've seen, in my opinion, that most attorneys are very good at tearing others down and blaming them and exposing their weaknesses. And it's just part of an attorney's training. It's something that the better they do, the more likely they are to be successful. And if an attorney is able to tear down the other side, then they'll often look much better. So for at least a year, this guy, and this was a long time ago, it was over a decade ago, so it's not very current news, but this guy and several of his followers continued to write about how I was the cause of the lack of their success in getting their jobs, which didn't make sense because I was actually getting people jobs. And it just doesn't make sense because I'm not even a legal employer. But that's what happened. And maybe they were upset that they weren't going to get represented. I don't know. But what was most disconcerting is why someone would take all their anger, fears, and frustration out on job prospects and in the legal system and put it on one person. And it wouldn't have been much of a problem, but he got other people to buy into this too. And I was puzzled that this kind of site, and the site's no longer up, which I'll tell you why in a minute, and didn't have anything to do with me. But he took his show on the road and he started driving to different offices that we have around the country. He drove to one in Cleveland to Chicago, where I don't work. I work in the Los Angeles area, or did at the time, and asked for me. And when the receptionist informed him that it didn't work there, he turned around and returned to his home in Ohio and logged on to the computer and let everyone know that he didn't find me in that office, and therefore the company didn't exist, even though our name was in the building. And then other people were very happy about that and said that we knew we didn't exist, it's when people are looking for jobs, and this is a good economy right now and a good legal market, but sometimes when people are looking for positions, they may look for other people to blame if they're having a hard time with the market. And it's not other people. So in terms of Mr. Winston, I called him several times and explained to him that I existed and I would help him find a job, but he at that point wanted to be angry. And his writing started to become a little bit threatening and threatening violence and that sort of thing. So I had to go to court, and before the court ordered everything, because there was some violence associated with it, he agreed to take the writings down. But then he would put them up again. And then incredibly got a job as a prosecutor eventually in Cleveland at some point. I don't know how that happened. And then I'm sure that the people in the prosecutor's office eventually found his blog, and that hurt him as well. And he became a solo practitioner. And then this happened. This is just a headline. A lawyer who represented one of 3 defendants in a lengthy Franklin County drug trafficking case killed himself on March 13th after fleeing the scene from a shooting in Cleveland. Crazy. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot. And what had happened, I don't need to read it all, but he'd actually gone into some house and shot somebody in a robbery, and then was running away. The point here is that the police never commented on what role he had in the hearing, but the point was he had broken into a house and killed someone and shot 2 people and stole, that sort of thing. So a lot of people, and this is actually a very tragic story, and I'm glad certainly that I wasn't shot by him, but people have a lot of anger sometimes about things, and they don't make sense. And I've certainly had a lot of anger about things in the past. And at the time of this murder, this particular guy was fighting with the judge and scheduled to give testimony against her. And his particular issue was he blamed others, and he was blaming people irrationally. And he may have done that because it made him feel better about himself. I don't know. And that's obviously an extreme. But this sort of anger characterizes a lot of people So when I was growing up, one of my relatives used to drive me through neighborhoods of nice homes in our city. And the goal of these drives was really not to admire how other people lived. It was really I was given other sorts of messages. I was told if you lived in one of these nice houses, you'd never get to see your family, need to work all the time. I was told that people that live like this need to do bad things to others. In order to live like, if you live like this, you're clearly cheating or doing something wrong. And there were all kinds of reasons that I was told that financial success must be the product of being bad. And there was something wrong with people that were successful. And basically being told, instead of feeling bad about ourselves, you're supposed to feel bad about yourself for doing well, not good about it. And so many times children who grow up poor are often told by their parents, and kids who have a lot of things are given these things by their parents because their parents do not love them. And from a young age, a lot of people are also taught that we can feel better about ourselves by finding fault in others who are more successful. And the entire tabloid industry, which is very huge, is generally about finding fault in people that are in the public line and feeling better about yourself because more important people than you have problems. So in the legal profession, I think one big thing, the final thing I'll just say is that I think a lot of people have a big need for status. And there's a huge desire to tear others down and attack them. And this really doesn't serve any useful purpose. The only solution to this lack of status is not to care at all and to attempt to elevate one's own status and to have others help elevate one's status. In my opinion, the best option, I think, is really to go ahead and just do the best job you can with everything and don't really be that concerned about all this at all. You need to really be someone who contributes and does the best possible work and contributes and helps others in your firm and works hard, because ultimately I've learned, and one of the hardest things that I've had to learn is the world doesn't really care about the reasons that you're not achieving what you want to achieve. Whatever the explanations are, they honestly do not matter to the world. When you're having any sort of issue and you're not reaching your goals, people don't really care about explanations. They'll act like they do, but they really care about results. And so if you're not doing as well as you want to, my biggest suggestion really is to apply yourself more. And in the legal profession, if people aren't getting jobs, I always say you need to apply to more places. And if people aren't getting the results they want in anything, you need to really push yourself to do better and better. And that is advice, that the better you do and the harder you push, that for yourself and take responsibility is really the only way that you're going to get better. I've also noticed a lot of times when when I used to be a litigator and represent people that were being sued or companies were being sued, that a lot of times things would happen where someone would not, or people would want there not to be certain rules or certain ways of having to do things. And then when things didn't work out, they would blame someone else. And that happens a lot. I've certainly done that before. But if you're not getting the results you want, then the best thing you can do really is to try to pick yourself up and give yourself a much better experience, I think, by looking for every possible way to succeed and to do well instead of creating roadblocks to that. And that's really how I look at things. I don't really look at things in that way. I look at them as you need to fix everything that you're doing and you need to get much better and really improve yourself and not make other people responsible. And it's interesting. I've been reading about the failure of companies like Sears and other companies recently in bookstores and other places that haven't done well with kind of new economies. And if you go into malls these days, a lot of they're just abandoned all over the country because Amazon and places, things like that are taking over. And many times when you're not doing as well as you want, it's a sign that you need to change. And one of the things that happens a lot of times with older attorneys is they're used to doing things a certain way and they may need to change. And businesses go through cycles and people go through cycles. And with job search, and that's also, you need to, keep changing the way you do things. So I think that the best thing you can always do is really look at what you can do differently and really apply yourself. And when you do, you end up being much more effective in the long run. I think you need to, instead of blaming other people, you need to say, what could I have done differently? What could I do differently? How can I fix this? How can I really listen to what's being said or what the market's saying to me? And most people can't. If you think about businesses like Sears and other companies that go out of business, a lot of times what they've done wrong is they haven't listened to the market. And it's like that with an attorney too. You need to listen if you're not doing as well as you can. And you can't out and attack other people. And I think that when this man was stalking me and then ended up killing people, which is hard to believe, but he obviously was upset at the legal job market. And I got to see that, and his identity and all these things that were so important to him were threatened by not getting what he wanted. And maybe the solution would have been accept my help or to figure out how to become better at what he was doing, or to maybe choose another profession if he wasn't getting the results and he really was applying himself. And that's really the big lesson. And this has been a little bit of a quick presentation today, but the big point that I want to make is that you can always do well. You can do well personally, you can do well professionally if you're constantly challenging yourself and doing the absolute best you can and figuring out what could you do differently? How could you take better care of yourself and do better? And those are really some of the important things. Thank you. And I will take a quick break for 1 or 2 minutes and come back and do questions. And I encourage you to ask as many questions, not just about what today's presentation was, but about anything that is challenging you in your career or you're thinking about or you'd like to know. And I'm happy to answer any questions today. And I'll be back in 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so let's get started with questions. Give me 1 second here, guys. I'm just pulling up a Word document so I can type the questions out on there. And again, sorry to start late in a court hearing, which is good. And again, as many questions as you guys have, these questions are always extremely helpful for a lot of times for other people because other people often have the same questions you do about different things or about their careers, and it's always helpful. And the questions, of course, are always anonymous. So, okay, so we'll go to the first question, and I'll pull this up here. The first question is, do you post the webinar to your site afterwards? And the question is, yes, these are always posted after the webinar. And here's a good question. Someone disagrees with the webinar. Let's see. So I disagree with this presentation. Sometimes you legitimately need to change jobs if you're performing well and not receiving recognition. That's a good point. For example, my last firm was very toxic. The partner I worked for was constantly abusive and criticized my work. I received meager raises, and the only reason I received a decent bonus was because of an outside management committee that independently. Sometimes I did make a few mistakes, but not to the level that this partner was making them out to be. And at no point was a client ever damaged as a result. After I switched firms, my work environment improved substantially. I'm much happier my new firm is flexible. I would say the work product improved because I'm working. That's absolutely right. And I also agree. I think that the quality of the people you work with, there's an article on BCG that I wrote called Find Your Tribe or something along those lines. And essentially, what that is and what that article is about is it's about trying to work with people that match your ways of thinking things about things. And I apologize if my presentation came across the wrong way. But many times when you switch firms, you're in a better work environment. You can certainly do BCG search. It's not findyourtribe.com. It's BCG search, find your tribe, something along that line. It's an article by me. Yeah. So many times if you're getting bad feedback from the environment that you're in, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. Many times it means that there's something wrong with the environment. And so that's a very good point. And I don't necessarily believe that the firm that you're in is going to, that if you're not happy there, the problem's you. Many times the problem is the environment. And different people are happy in different types of environments. There's absolutely, and perform well in different types of environments. If you're working around people that have similar work styles and people that are very similar to you, then you will often do much better, especially if you're in a toxic environment. I do recommend that you do what you can to get into a better environment. What I would say though, is that the quality of the people you're working with can make a big difference in terms of your happiness. So that's important. And there's not a lot of questions today. So this is, I guess it's because we're at the start of the summer, but can I help you find a job as a patent agent? Yes. Let me just see here. I do help people find positions as patent agents. We do primarily law firm placements, but patent agents, for those of you that don't know it, do essentially the job that a patent attorney does, for the patent bar, but they aren't always admitted to the patent. They're not always admitted patent attorneys. Okay, but you don't have to, in order to practice patent law before the patent bar, you only need to be admitted to the patent bar, which means you have to have a scientific type of background and so forth. And law firms do hire patent agents, and so we do a lot of work for them. Okay, let's see here. I wasn't expecting an extreme example on how to address this constant concern. Attorney discontent in professional life, I agree. There's a high level of narcissistic personality characteristics in the legal profession. Exactly. I wrote an article too called Narcissistic Personality Disorders in the Legal Profession, but that's a good point. Somewhere we need to address these things, acknowledge systematic racism issues and groupthink control to continue to involve the respective profession. I think you can expand on this topic. I completely agree. And I think that's a really good point. I think that there are attorneys as a general rule. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the type of people that go into the legal profession, and maybe a lot of the stuff that it takes to get ahead in the legal profession. But there's so much narcissism, and you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of the attorneys that I know, they become very successful. I think that they do it by really just personalizing every single thing that happens and believing that they're completely just almost to an extreme. I absolutely agree with that. Narcissism is a big deal, and attorneys are very narcissistic, I think, and they're difficult to work with. It's sometimes when I'm talking to very successful attorneys, they almost don't even hear what you're saying because they're so concerned about themselves, and it's a big thing. And I think many times they need to be like that to be successful, or the ones that are like that are the ones that become successful. In terms of systematic racism and groupthink control, I think that's all true. I think there's a lot of groupthink control, and I think there's a lot of systematic issues, the type of expectations that are expected with people. And I do believe that it's difficult if you don't have that narcissistic personality, or for a lot of people to do well in certain types of firms. Those are all really good points. And I think that it's very difficult, by the way, when you excluded or you feel attacked, and many times if you don't know why, someone that's upset because they believe that the environment they're in is racist, or someone who's upset because they believe the environment is exclusionary towards them, is very difficult. So I agree with everything you're saying. And I don't know the solution to it. I think the solution is already happening to some extent with a lot of social movements and things that are happening, but that's one of the things that I think. Okay, so this is an interesting question. When is the best time of year to attempt to move to a larger, more prestigious firm? The best time of year, in my opinion, to do that, and there's other article I've written, like when is the best time of year to look for a larger job? But the best time of the year, in my opinion, is often when other people aren't looking. So like right now, not a lot of people are looking, but at the real time, I think one of the best times is actually around November and December. I think that many times law firms know that there's going to be a lot of people leaving in January and so forth after they get their bonuses. So if you start looking early, then law firms many times will hire you because They would rather do the hiring before their people start leaving in January and February, and I think it's a lot easier to get into firms at that time of year. That's been my experience, that you're often much better off trying to move to a larger firm at that time of year. And I've also written an article. I think it's called "Why November and December Are the Best Times of the Year to Look for New Positions." One of the problems with looking for a job right now is human resources departments are large professional groups in a lot of firms, and they have their summer programs, and so that requires a lot of work for them in the summer. So, okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone being on this call today. And again, next week we'll also a lot of, actually, here's a question that came in the chat, so I'm going to answer that as well, just so you can get that. I'm having an unusual situation as a civil attorney after a majority of career as a prosecutor. Many firms assume a 10-year civil litigator would only have 3 years on the civil side. This leads to performance expectations that are hurting me and leading to shorter jobs. Any advice on addressing this in interviews to set reasonable expectations? So that's a very common thing. If you have experience in one branch of the law and you're going into a new one, I think this is, in terms of the expectations, I think that you just need to really buckle down and work much harder. And I hate to say that, but you need to learn how things are done and probably work a little bit harder than other people are at your level. If you have only 3 years of civil experience, I'm sure you can do trials just fine, but it's probably like a lot of the writing and other stuff is what is going to create problems for you. So in terms of it's very heavy motion practice and so forth if you're a civil litigator, and the motions are different than as a prosecutor. So I would recommend, if it was me, just working as hard as you can, and really, and when you get into a firm, I think you can learn very quickly. In most cases, when you get into a law firm, you can get, but you want to get mentors and explain that sort of thing. And I understand that the expectations may be a lot different. It depends on the prosecutor's office you're with, and they have different expectations as well. So I think that's a very good question. But I would get in the door, and when you do get in the door to places, you do the best you can, but really explain the experience, the level of experience. If it's leading to shorter jobs, then that's a perfect example. You have to ask yourself, what is it that's causing you to not be able to stick around as long or to keep your jobs as long? And I don't know what that is when the mistakes, but if someone says, sometimes people will be very clear with you. Sometimes they'll tell you directly, or they won't tell you directly. They may say your hours are too long, or not long enough. You need to bill more hours, or you need to be more careful, meaning you need to research the law and make sure your conclusions are better, or you can't make so many careless errors, or you need to better. I don't know. But typically, and this is what my presentation was about today, if they're coming across and saying something to you, law firms will always tell you what's wrong. They won't always say so directly, so they'll never say you're not billing enough hours. They may say, we'd like you to work harder, or they'll say, we'd like you to figure out how to get more work, or they'll say, we'd like you to be careful, or they'll say, you need to impress clients and get more work. They'll say whatever the issue is, and sometimes they'll be very careful on how they pan that. But the big issue, I think, many times between being a civil attorney and being a prosecutor are the requirements for the hours and the requirements for bringing in business, and what those expectations are. Many times when you get to be 10 years out, it is harder to hold on to positions because you're at a higher billing rate and expected to have more business and start to get business or to do work that's at the same level as partners. Talk to the firm and understand what you could have done differently and what they would recommend you do in the future. And if you do that, then you should be in great shape. This is a great question, and the answer to this is yes. So I actually do not reject people anymore. I don't reject anyone. The majority of people I work with are people that we couldn't work with initially. So the majority of attorneys I work with are people I couldn't work with initially, people could not work with initially. So that happens. So if people come back and they reapply, then we'll work with them. And most of the time, but we'll find them too. But there's all these practice areas that didn't used to be marketable that are marketable now. We place insurance defense. What else? Didn't used to be marketable. We place small towns. Didn't used to be marketable. We place people in trust and estates. Every practice area you can think of. Personal injury. These areas didn't used to be marketable, and now they are. We work with people and place them all the time after they submit their resume. As a matter of fact, it's almost on a daily basis, I would say 9 out of 10 of the people that we work with are people that we did not work with. People we did not work with initially. Okay, that is all that I have for today. And thank you everyone for being on the call. And I look forward to talking to you guys next week.